Hello, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual event with Nikki Moustaki, Richard Blanco, and Caridad Moro-Gronlier. Nikki Moustaki, author of the memoir Bird Market of Paris, holds an MA in poetry from New York University, an MFA in poetry from Indiana University, and an MFA in fiction from New York University. She is the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts grant in poetry, along with many other national writing awards. Her poetry, fiction, and essays have appeared in various newspapers and literary magazines, anthologies, and college textbooks, including the New York Times, Good Housekeeping, Publishers Weekly, The Village Voice, the Miami Herald, and others. She's the author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Writing Poetry and the poetry collection Extremely Lightweight Guns. Caridad Moro-Gronlier is the author of Tortillera and the chapbook Visionware. She is a contributing editor of Grabbed, Writers Respond to Sexual Assault. Her recent work can be found at the Best American Poetry blog, West Trestle Review, Literary Mama, The Sextant Review, Limp Wrist Review, and others. A career educator, she's an English professor at FIU and NBC in Miami, Florida, where she resides with her wife and son. Selected by President Obama as the 5th presidential inaugural poet in U.S. history, Richard Blanco is the first Latinx, immigrant, and gay person to serve in such a role. Born in Madrid to Cuban exile parents and raised in Miami, the negotiation of cultural identity characterizes his many collections of award-winning poetry, including his most recent, How to Love a Country. He has also authored the memoirs For All of Us, One Day, An Inaugural Poet's Journey, and The Prince of Los Cucuyos, A Miami Childhood. Blanco is a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, has received numerous honorary doctorates, serves as an education ambassador for the Academy of American Poets, and is an associate professor of Florida International University. Throughout today's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order copies of Extremely Lightweight Guns or any book by any of these poets by pressing the green button below. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. So now, without further ado, let me invite our poets to the screen.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Here we
hello,
are.
Nikki. Hello, Carrie.
Here we are.
Hello.
So good to see my besties' faces today.
And it is so exciting to be here with you. I mean, this book is a long time coming, right?
It is, like yours.
Yeah, exactly.
That just came out, too.
That just came out. We've been, and isn't that beautiful serendipity? We've been friends since freshman year of college, and there's a long-held dream, and it came true at the same time. And then I met Richard in school, too, but you had met him on your own, and it was kind of like this beautiful symbiosis, right, Richard?
Yeah, there's always something to be said about community of writers as part of being a writer. We need each other, not just for workshop, right? Though that's a big part of it, but also just for emotional support and just all around cheerleading, right? And I'm so happy. I'm so happy for both of you and your new books. Just like something that I've sort of been waiting for myself in a way, very much.
Absolutely. I mean, you were a great mentor to me, even from the very, very start. So it's this beautiful, as I said, symbiosis that led to this moment in time, and so exciting. How does it feel, Nikki?
With the two of you, I feel like the three of us were utterly meant to be like glued together for our lives. There's no way this would have happened without that, for sure.
And I think it's reflected in the work too, because a lot of our cultural touchstones in each aspect of our works kind of meet, they intersect. Even though they come from different perspectives and different point of view, there is this intersection, and that speaks to us what Richard, I think, was saying, that it's not just about the writing, because our lives intersect, and when your lives intersect, the work also intersects. So that is so important for any group of people, and trying to write is to commune with each other, read each other's work, comment on the work. It will result in not just the writing, but in friendships that will last a life.
Well, and I also think the three of us are really good readers for each other. And that doesn't happen all the time. You can have a really good friend that's a great writer and they're not a good reader for you, and vice versa. And I just think like the three of us are really, really good readers for each other. We read all of each other's work. I helped Carrie order her book.
Yes.
For Richard, I read everything, and I took an author photo, I think, for a couple of your books. I think I named one of your books. So, and you guys do the same for me. That's great.
Yeah, Nikki's a great editor, actually.
I'm ruthless. That's why.
She's ruthless.
I am
She's like,
ruthless.
chop this out, cut this over here.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I have no tact.
It's like you want to know if you have spinach in your teeth. That's the friend.
It's the equivalent.
You want to know if your stanza is weak, right?
That's right. That's right.
So we have enough trust built in and enough understanding of each other's voices that those are very targeted, very thought out comments, and we're not afraid to say, you want to go back to that.
Exactly. That's the most important thing. Because also, if you give it to somebody else, they're too tactful. It doesn't help. It's not helpful. You want someone that's going to be really like a little vicious with your.
And knows your voice.
Right.
A lot of times, Nikki's comments were like, "Where's Richard here?" Like it just is. It's not your voice. So, but speaking of voices, today we're here to celebrate your voice. And what a voice. It's really interesting to also, even though we know each other, to also uncover each other or discover each other also still in the work, no matter how much we are familiar with it. So I think you want to say a little bit about the book, right, Nikki? But I just stand in awe of the language, your prowess with the language. It's just like, I think I've told you, it's like, I have no idea how you do this. I could never do this because I'm like this narrative, neat little engineer poet. And that's fine too. We all have our strengths, but it's just, I stand in awe of this enrapturing of language and metaphor and whatnot. But tell us a little bit more.
Well, the thing
I
really like, here's the book. Well, there it is. That my besties got me. I really like linguistic gymnastics. Like that's the thing that excites me the most. And I know that we're in kind of an era of like confessional poetry and really personal stuff. And I'm so into like the craft and the language. And it's just a personal preference, I guess. And so that's what I try to do is like really make the language interesting, different, new. Whatever jungle gym poetry, basically.
Yeah, but it's also not. You feel an incredible sort of real human voice behind these words. It's not just experimentation for experimentation's sake, right? There's these personas created that are just, you're swept away by their struggles, by their internal psychology. It's just. I always think it's like this interesting intersection of fiction, poetry, and actually drama. Like I felt like these poems could be on stage.
No, you're right. And
like
so
overtures, right? Like
no, correct.
Different,
and
like a chorus.
So I really like, and most of this book is what I call speculative poetry, which basically means like fiction poetry. So it's a lot of persona poems and things like that. And one of the poems, the first poem in the book, so there's three sections, and three of the sections are one long poem, and then one section is a few short poems. And the first long poem was actually a section that I pulled out of a book-length poem that I wrote that I was thinking could almost be a play. It had all these characters, even more characters that are in here. It's really cool. I think someday I'll revisit it. But I always thought like this could be on stage. So it's interesting that you picked that up as well, And
I love your mention of that because that's one of the beauties of the long form poem, right? You can adapt it into different things. You can pull things out and make it stand on its own. You can adapt it, like you said, for the stage. You can put it back into that first idea of that long book. So it may seem like a marathon, but there's many ways to cross the line.
A lot of short sprints make the marathon, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's the thing about writing a long poem, I think we were talking about before, is that you have to have the stamina to do it. It really is like not easy. And these took me years to write. I mean, it doesn't take much to write a first draft, but then it's all the revising, it's all the crafting, and you have to make sure it doesn't fizzle out by the end. Like the ending in the middle has to be as strong as the beginning. And it's really easy to start out strong, but you have to like really maintain that pace and that intensity through the whole thing. So I think I think it would be good for people who wanted to, explore that form, to take a look at this book.
Yeah, because it takes on different strategies, different devices to be able to maintain, the speaker, the readers and the listeners' interest in the poem. So it is, the long poem itself is a kind of gymnastics, like you're saying too, right? You can't just be the same. And there's another thing, sir, at least Nikki and I have in common, which is our mentor Campbell McGrath and about the long poem. So it is almost like a subgenre of poetry.
Well, that's where I got it from, right?
Yeah.
Because we both studied with Campbell, and he writes these long poems, like these book length poems, and that was so inspiring to me. And I think like he got it from like Walt Whitman, right? And then he took that tradition, and then we picked it up from Campbell. So it's interesting how it keeps going, and how poets are influenced from so long ago, and it trickles down or up. I don't know, whatever. But I definitely got this from Campbell for sure. Yeah.
And it's not just one; it's three. So the book itself is really brave in doing that.
Yeah.
You hardly see a book of poetry with like three long poems.
No, it's true. You would
like,
see one
really
anchor poem, right? So you'd see one long anchor poem, and the rest would be short. But it's like there's three in here. So
cool.
For better or for worse, but they were
absolutely. When I read it in one sitting. So it's very compelling, and I think that helps. The flow of it is all the different voices, and the voices are in and of themselves very formidable. So it's not like there's a weaker voice in the bunch, which makes it all just go very quickly as you're reading. It's a great read.
Yeah, and each of the three long poems are very distinct in what
they're really different.
Right?
They're really
completely
different.
distinct,
right.
and
that's true.
Yeah, and yet still Nikki. Nikki's work, right?
Correct.
So should I read the title poem?
I think that's a great idea.
Everybody always wonders about this title because it really is such a weird thing. Do you see my extremely lightweight gun here? Arm that I got. So basically, this is also a speculative poem, right? It's a persona poem, which is a type of speculative poem, and it's called Extremely Lightweight Guns. And I wrote this when I was at getting an MFA in Indiana University, which Richard came and visited me, and I think it was your first time seeing snow. Remember that?
Yeah.
And then remember we tried to drive in it, and we couldn't do it.
To Florida.
So we just.
Two Miamians and their first snowfall.
We skidded down the road. We abandoned the car. We went to a bar. That was it. We were done. So, okay. So at like 3:00 in the morning, there's this gun shop called Don's Guns. And he could only afford, I guess, to buy commercial time at like 3 a.m. So if you were up in 3 a.m, you'd have this like very poorly made commercial, this guy, Don, and he would say his big thing is he would say, I don't like making money. I just love selling guns. And he was so into it. So anyway, I wrote this persona like I was like this guy. Okay. Extremely lightweight guns. The epigraph is, I don't like making money. I just love selling guns. Don of Don's Guns. And it's a prose poem. Literally no recoil. And if the steel is cold, I don't know it. If bullets taste like gardenias, like tongues, like bathwater or greasy fingers, wine flowing over in my tin-field cup, I don't know it. I don't like making money. I just love selling guns. I ache all day for a smoothbore shot. I'm a hammer cocker, trigger friendly, barrel ready, slide that slide and make the sight sure. I want the longest operating rod you got. I want to stare down that dark pill, find my mark, carry the pheasant home. I have an ivory 2-shot in my panties drawer, a loaded revolver under my downy pillow, and at the pawn shop, a rack fuller than a pinup calendar. I'll mail them unmarked if you ask. I got a modern howitzer out back. You can rock that cradle for a couple bucks, but it's not the money. There's nothing sexier than the Bill of Rights. Well, maybe an old cannon with a full wad and a wooden rammer. How do bullets taste? Some say gardenias, tongues, bathwater, greasy fingers, deep red wine flowing over in your cup, a bullet's core snapping into point, your mother's sweet voice, the shot recoiling into your hands, the pitch in your legs after a father's belt. Pull it again, the real impact again. I've got steel between my teeth. My dentist loves me. The neighbors hate me. I ask the guns every day, fuck me.
Cool.
That's usually a crowd pleaser.
Also, lots of social commentary on there too, right? In a way, it's a social political poem, deep psychology in there too.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of like sexy stuff in there. That's
deep
really
psychology.
weird. Yeah,
I love this kind of male voice you've got going on, and then how you just kind of switch it when
the two shot in my panties drawer. Yeah,
which I love, and it kind of also speaks to that there is no gender in this sort of love that you're documenting in this poem, right? And that
it calls to mind. It calls to mind too that in some ways, just thinking about that now, in that poem, and also something that I think for the writers out there that that poems take sometimes a lot of linguistic research, right? Like some of the words you had to use in there, like and throughout the other poems too.
I don't know what a modern howitzer is. Whatever I had to figure all that out. Yeah,
and then we researched that and we passed that on almost. So the poem is also in a way a teaching in some ways too, because or passing on what we learn and what we research. Yeah. And I see that in all the poems that took a lot more than just the words on the page, right? Like thinking about.
So I'll tell you how I wrote the. There's a long poem in here. We none of us are going to read from it today, but it's called "Dreaming of Chickens." And I think it might be the longest poem in here. And I actually used the Farmer's Almanac. You know how the old Farmer's Almanac comes every year, and I used to get it every year, and I used to just mine that thing for poetry. Like that, it is rich for poetry. Like everyone should get that every year, every poet, and it's amazing. And I use the almanac for a lot of this poem, that just ideas and jumping off points, because it's just a weird, quirky poem, and I would have thought the people in it, the three characters in it, would be probably looking at that almanac.
Pulling in that other kind of language, and I could see that in there for sure. Cool.
So we can find poems anywhere, really. I mean, you just have to look, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was all the time.
There's a lot of music in it too. I'm going on another tangent. There's a lot of music in these kind of hard language. Because it's almost mimicking gunfire in some places. That listing that you do. But there's also this gorgeous kind of music that's happening, which shows how sometimes people feel very constrained by a form, and it doesn't have to be that way. You can do a lot of work within the form as well.
Oh, absolutely. So I love form. That's like my thing. I used to call myself a neo-formalist, but that's like so pretentious or whatever. But anyway. But that's really how I consider myself. And I find form to be very freeing. Very freeing. And most people find it really constraining, but I don't know why. If I'm to write a sonnet or a villanelle, there's something about being in that box and having to like fill up that space. To me, I don't know what it is, but I love it so much. Like, I just really love form.
It's kind of like having to cook up a meal with the things in your pantry. And
it's exactly what it is.
That kind of freedom. You only have these things, and you have to make these things work.
That's right. That's right.
So, and that's
so even though it is like a recipe, like a sonnet's like a recipe, but like it is literally like opening up the pantry and just grabbing stuff. Like it's great. Exactly. I think more poets should work in form, just not even if it's something they're going to publish, but just to get the gymnastics, because that's where the gymnastics come in. You really have to be limber to do form, and I think it's cool. Yeah.
So I think Richard and I would love to read a section of sections of one of your longer poems. It's the first poem in the book, It's called The Mind's Negative. I'd like to read section 3, basically because that first line of this poem just slayed me.
Okay.
It slayed me, and I'll talk a little bit about that after.
Okay.
So,
Talk about the poem a little bit first, because or else
it is a poem about domestic violence, and it's in different voices. We have the voices of the woman. We have the voices of the stairs, which is such a wonderful choice. You have the Blackbird Woman. Then you have the voice
poet
of the cento, the poet. So there are different voices remarking on the same situation. And it's just masterfully done. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Part 3, the woman. Why did the holes in the walls not seem like tunnels out of there? I kept sneakers by the door, so white I could return them to the store. Why did my feet go numb when he raised his hands? The holes scream when he whimpers. He paces, his guilt walking, wearing a strip in the carpet, shoes by the door. Where are my feet? Where are my hands? I am not this woman. This is not my life. An hour to sunrise, beneath pink cotton sheets, he snores the sleep of the blessed. It won't matter that my mind's negatives will have to be burned someday. In the walls, memory sits like bruises hidden beneath shirt sleeves. I am the inventor of silence. Inside the push, the heart's atoms, such bits of advice for the body. You will know the stairs as well as you know your own knees. You will dream his hands inside you when you sleep.
That was a beautiful reading. Thank you.
Thank you. That first line, why did the holes in the walls not seem like tunnels out of there? And I think that encapsulates every person who has ever asked, why didn't she leave? And it's such a visceral, I can see the wall, I can see the punch, I can see the fight, I can see the desire of the speaker to want to just, and the tunneling, right? That word, tunneling out, like the having to excavate everything that mires a victim in that sort of situation. And from there, we get, and then the consideration of, he's sleeping, he's guilty, he feels bad still amid that tunnel out. There are other considerations. And those sneakers by the door, because they are a vehicle for escape, but they are also white and unused.
Right.
And virginal and unsure of what will be found outside. So just beautiful, beautiful imagery, very weighty, very thought-laden, and I think carefully chosen, that articulate much more than just a sheer image, but all of the nuance within that image and that first line. Well, I think I texted you when I read it. Was so powerful to me. Well, why didn't you leave?
Yeah.
And that's like there's a whole why. The speaker asking why didn't I even consider that? And of course, going back to the first moment he punches a hole in the wall, you might want to go, but you patch the hole.
But you patch the hole up.
You patch the hole.
Yeah, you patch the hole.
And every time you patch the hole, that hole is weaker. It's like when a door hits, and you patch it, and the next time it goes a little deeper. So every time the patch is just a little shallower. Yeah. So beautifully done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Rick,
do you want to read your part that you wanted to read?
Sure. Unless you want to give us a little more insight.
On that.
Okay, so insight on this one. So most of the whole book is obviously speculative, but I did have this jerky boyfriend in college who, he could be on this right now. I don't know, but anyway, whatever. And he was saying, what is it?
Crea fama y acuéstate a dormir. Create fame and go to sleep because you already did it. So.
Yeah, exactly. But he was super jerky, and we used to get in fights, and he would literally punch holes in the walls, in his own walls in his own apartment, and then he would put up like posters over them, so the whole freaking place was just postered up Like, what are you doing, idiot? And then there was one day we got in a big fight, and he kind of like pushed me down the stairs a little bit. I mean, it wasn't like a whole huge flight of stairs, but it was enough stairs to where like I skinned my knee, and then I went, and then the neighbor opened his apartment, and I went into the neighbor's apartment, closed the neighbor out, locked the neighbor out, and called the police, and like got this guy arrested. So anyway, that's, you know, don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. But that's kind of what this is about. That's kind of what this first one's about. But yeah, I'm not traumatized or anything now. It's just
that brings up a great point for me that I think is part of what you do brilliantly. And like I was saying earlier, like even though these are persona poems, there's such an incredible human in these voices, right? There's a knowing, there's a real feeling, and it's really interesting because I you know, as a professor in creative writing, and I always try to say, you know, poetry at the end of the day, at its best, is an act of imagination in some ways, right? And even though sometimes we're telling very personal narratives or whatnot, there's different ways of poems can do that isn't just about, you know,
an event,
right? Or like just being, you know, or, you know, a lot of students, as we all are afraid of being exposed or like don't want to talk. Well, I said, but there's amazing ways that poetry can speak to something, and nobody needs to be all the wiser, right? Right. And it creates the thing is the authenticity, getting back to emotional honesty, the authenticity of the voices there. But you don't necessarily have to relate what you just told us, because in a way that's no longer really part of the poem anyway.
Exactly.
You've created an imaginary, a real imaginary world, right? That's even truer than that moment, perhaps through the art. I kind of always feel when I'm walking through, because I feel like I'm walking through Nikki's poems, like, or in a movie, like I would say, like I feel like I'm in a Fellini movie, like where you understand without understanding, like, you know, it's incredible, like this idea of like this presence that you understand something that you can't even quite articulate it. And I think that's what I love about this Black Woman, part 5 of the long poem of
Blackbird
Woman, the Blackbird Woman,
and and the Blackbird Woman is part of the imagination of the whole thing too. Yeah.
And I'm just satisfied by the incredible, not only word gymnastics, but the gymnastics of the imagination and the connections, like the wall, right? Like the wall tunneling. So you're investing your imagination in these voices, and that's what makes them so real and alive, right? So anyway, yes, this is a number 5 in the long poem, The Blackbird Woman. Once there was a woman. No one loved the woman, and the woman grew blind. She couldn't see the blackbirds perched in her belly like tumors, waiting to turn into hands and choke her. No one could see the blackbirds either, so they grew until the woman herself turned into a blackbird, shaped like a woman. You could look through her into a world where no one had hands, just wings that cut the air like jugglers' knives. The woman walked around with her wings because no one told her she could fly. She assumed she was merely a lens through which others hated themselves. Their faces transformed in her, became feral and mean. The woman absolved herself daily with suicide, but every morning she'd wake, unfurl her oily wings, and step into the day where people ignored her. But this isn't about the woman who learned to fly because she didn't. This is about how, even as sorrow eddies around her, like the moonlight, she tries to see, even as her eyes dim and her wings begin painful molting, even as she is hated for her ignorance, it is she that is remembered.
Thank you. Wow, that's a beautiful reading.
I'm like gone. I just leave. I'm like, I'm this woman. I believe every single image in here as if it were like literally happening right in front of me. but that one of just wings that cut the air like jugglers' knives, and then this just really interesting switch, and like you said, gymnastics of logic too, right? And of language and logic. The one where, but this isn't about the woman. This isn't about how the woman learned to fly, line break, because she didn't.
Yeah.
That's just like crazy. It's like meta, right? It's like this meta stuff going on. And I just feel like I feel like I know this Blackbird Woman as if she were like my neighbor. Like, it's just,
Well, and you know, I had a lot of birds at the time, as you guys know.
oh yeah.
So all my poems are utterly filled with bird imagery everywhere, because that was so on my mind when I was writing these, and it still is, you know.
Yeah, the birds come back in the long poem too, and so this is another thing about the long poem, weaving these so that these little things connect back and forth. And the very last section, right? The blackbirds come back.
Yeah, I could read You want me to read the Blackbird Woman, the other Blackbird Woman section?
Sure, as long as we're with her.
As long as we're with her, okay. Do one of you want to read it, or you want me to read it?
No, I'd like to hear you.
Okay, excuse me. So this is the second of the Section 8, the Blackbird Woman. One day the congregation found the woman after a great wind had blown her onto the roof of their church, wings spread wide, awaiting something. Some people thought she was a bad omen, marking the church for fire or a death in the pews. Some thought she was a vision and fell to their knees, ruining their yellow Sunday dresses. Some thought she should be removed, so they removed her, but they couldn't fold her wings into her body. There she stood outside the church, wings wide, wind shuffling the feathers like cards, which made the ladies remember their bridge game, and they went off whispering. The sound made the fellows remember their hunting trip, and they strolled away smacking each other on the backs. The woman folded her wings and began walking home, which wasn't her home at all, but the place where she lived. The greatest of all possibilities is that she never makes it home. After all, it's a long way after such a great wind. I think that one's really, really pretty too.
No, that's amazing. But I love the greatest of possibilities is that she will not.
She doesn't make it home.
Yeah. This is something, brings up something interesting for me too, for like something I always fight against too in poetry, that sort of I think sometimes confines us, or doesn't let the imagination, or doesn't let language come out in some ways. But the whole show don't tell bit, like, I mean, we know it's important, certainly there's imagery, but sometimes I always tell my students, like, there's these great lines of telling, right? Like, of just really great, interesting, logical phrases of logic. Like, the greatest of possibilities is that she would not make it home. Like, no one has strung those words together before, right? And so it's a telling line, but it's amazing, right? And I think a lot of great poems have moments of telling, of earned telling, interesting telling, and I certainly see that in that line.
And I also think it's an instinct, or it's probably a human instinct for us to want to wrap everything up with a neat little bow and almost sometimes make a happy ending in a way. And as poets, we want to do that too, because we're human. But I think there's something really interesting about not letting everything have a happy ending and not tying everything up. There's some drama in that.
Like life.
Yeah,
like life.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I think we yearn for. You know, we want the answer, but we don't really, because the life happens in the trying to figure that out
in the journey, right?
And
right.
And which just a little comment on the birds again, in the flight. There's a lot of flight in this book.
Yeah,
whether it's mental flights or flights not taken, like those shoes by the door. That's a form of flight. And then so it's not just, you know, that you just put birds in. The birds become a central part of the arc of the book, which is, you wouldn't expect in a book called Extremely Lightweight Guns.
Right.
Right.
I really chose the title just because I know it was super evocative, even though it's just one of the poems is about it, but that was just a really evocative title. But
and it is.
Yeah.
So, well done.
I'll go ahead and read another one. It looks like we have like quite a bit of time. Should I go ahead and do that?
Sure,
of course.
Okay. I can read probably
a couple of questions. More. I don't know if you want to answer the question.
Oh yeah. Are there any questions? I don't see any questions.
Yeah, I
Oh,
see
yeah.
questions here.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, yeah, so it seems like we do have a few, and we can answer these, and maybe if we have some more, we can come back. Okay.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
do a little reading.
Yes.
Yeah, and these have to do actually with what you've just been talking about. So, the voice of Dawn of Dawn's Gun Shop is so unique. How do you go about searching for such a voice, and which voices work best? And I think you can all maybe speak to that as well.
I think I think a voice is something that's super sticks with you and doesn't let go. It's something sticky. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're forgetting about something, you're not going to write a poem about it. It's not interesting enough. But this guy, Don of Don's Guns, was just bananas. It was just so bananas. And I think those are the things, I love, as a writer, and people have asked me that, like normies, not writers, normal people. I love watching like true crime stuff. And I love when people have just like a banana story, because it's when people are doing something off, a little weird, not their compass is not pointed due north. It's a little this way. That's what's interesting to us, and if you can pick up on those things, that's where the journey is. It's not due north, right? It's somewhere else. So,
right.
Yeah.
And that's what's compelling. That's what you want to know about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we were talking earlier, I mean, in terms of finding voice, in terms of found poems in a way, right?
Yeah.
Also kind of a myth. And I'm not saying, of course, that we of course read poetry and we absorb poetry, but that's not the only place poetry comes from, right? But I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated with what is it? Headline is all these crime mystery shows of like who done it, the forensic shows. And so, I don't know. And I read a lot of psycho-spiritual books that to me inspires another kind of meditation. But yeah, I remember in architecture school, a friend of mine said, just look around you. Architecture's everywhere. It's not just a building, right? It's in a tree. It's in this pen. There's architecture. And I've always seen that in poetry, and it's about keeping your ears up. It's about being up at 3 a.m. listening to
the
Dawn.
antenna. You got to have the antennas up to catch all the stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also like you said, these are very compelling voices that stick to you. It's almost like an earworm when you hear a song. And they're such singular voices that you take them in and they become your own, if that makes any sense. Yeah. It's like your interpretation. I remember once Seal said that he didn't put liner notes with the lyrics in his albums back in the day when we used to read that. We couldn't Google the lyrics because he enjoyed how people heard it. It wasn't necessarily the lyrics, but their interpretation of the lyrics. So that's kind of what you do with Dawn, right? You take them in and you hear Dawn, but what we're getting is
the song.
The speaker doing Dawn.
Right.
It's also very interesting of how ads land, right? Because if we were to go to Dawn's PR guy, maybe not necessarily what he was hoping for when they cobbled together that commercial, but the cultural significance of that and where society gets its touchstones, and very much so for a certain segment of people who are up late. Dawn is it, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very important social commentary you're making as well. So the acquiring of voice is, I think, also an investigation into the different personas that live within our society and that contribute to the overall well-being or not of said society.
Yeah.
Nikki, when we were working on reading the manuscript, wasn't there another poem or something that also was started by a snippet of something from a story somewhere, or am I imagining that?
There was another persona poem about something. I had other prose poems in here.
Okay.
And they were all literally like something somebody said to me, and then I would grow it from there. Yeah.
Yeah, persona is interesting in terms of the question. I think I always think about that as a possibility for a poem because it lets us say things that we don't know how to say as the poet, and it can manifest itself, or it can be a tool in many different contexts. For example, I've written a poem about my grandmother in her voice because I just couldn't speak at her. She needed to speak for herself, and it opened up certain things. But also, I think what we may be thinking about here. This feels like a graduate seminar. I love it. It's also that we ourselves are personas, right? That we as writers have a voice inside of us that is what's creating the poem. And that voice also is, again, it's a reflection of the self, of the artistic self. In Nikki's book, that is taken to an nth degree, right? That artistic voice is just explodes into imagination. But I always, for those writers out there, the person that is sitting here talking to you is not necessarily the voice in my poems. That's someone else.
Right.
And someone who's is protected and safe, and it's that own person, and I don't feel exposed. What they're doing is what they're doing. So in a way, everything is a persona, right? It's trying to find that voice inside our head that sometimes is connected to voices that we hear. Okay, that doesn't sound right, but but language that's entering, and we process it through the art,
and I also really love fiction. I have an MFA in fiction too, as you guys know. And so I think like I'm so I have the what's it called? Whatever. Yeah. So the fiction's going to creep into the poetry with me, and the poetry is going to creep into the fiction. And I think that's great. I think those really work together.
Which was like something we talked about, because there's a lot of first person in this book. But it's speculative.
But it's not me. Yeah, it's not me. Yeah,
exactly. So that's wonderfully freeing, as Richard was saying, because you can take on this role, and you can really. It's like imagining. It's like playing house when we were kids, and you would like. I always wanted to be the mom, like of course, because mom was in charge, right? So but it was I got to be the mom that I imagined,
right?
And you get to be the I. With no shackles on that eye.
Yeah.
You're speaking for that. So that's wonderful too. Very freeing. And like, as somebody who writes also very narratively from my life, when sometimes family's like, whoa, wait, this didn't happen. And then I have to explain the moment of impetus of the poem may be real, but then the poem, as Richard said, becomes its own thing.
Right.
And if I change the details for the poem, this is not about the story. It's not a lie detector test. It's
exactly. Right.
So that's also very key to explain. You can write an I and be narrative without being the poet at all.
Right. Well, and also we do have freedom in the art that we do. And I think people think poetry has to be confessional, or it has to be about us. But take a look at like Picasso paintings. Like there's a portrait of the woman, and it's all messed up, right? Cubism, right? So, I mean, we can do that too, but we have this rap where like we're not supposed to do it or something, but that's not true. Like we can be and do and say whatever we want.
You can be in first person and not be you at all.
Totally. Right. Just like an artist would paint like a purple watermelon or whatever. That's their interpretation of it. It's the same with us.
That's a great analogy, and often at least for me, the better poems are when I let go of that feeling like I have to, be me in the poem, right? But then just let go of, and again, I think for writers, I'm always thinking of my students in that sense. It's so important for them to recognize that, right? Because then there's always a fear of feeling exposed. But if you are in the act of imagination and the act of art, so these Picasso paintings is a great example, right? I'm sure they're informed by love affairs and passion and all stuff, but there is the painting. Enjoy the painting. My life is my life. The painting is the painting. Right. Let the art historians figure the rest out later on. Right. The connections.
Yeah,
that's a great analogy of how poetry can be. I love that.
And I don't know if anybody. I mean, I don't know if anybody teaches beginners to poetry like that. And I think it would be interesting to have that out there.
Yeah,
in an intro, we're almost like still in a post-confessional stage in literature to some degree. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, you want to read that one poem?
Yeah, might as well read another poem. It's a short one. Oh, are you back?
Yeah,
should
and then
come
we'll,
back.
and then maybe we'll take a
And then we'll
question.
take another question.
Yeah,
Okay.
just to keep it interesting.
So this is a poem that I wrote in Indiana. So I had this boyfriend. Both of you knew him in Indiana, and he was a poet too. He was doing comparative lit, but we were both writing poetry, and we would do this exercise all the time where we would give each other a word, and then we would give each other like 20 minutes or something to just write a poem. And then of course you can revise it and stuff later. But so the word was cleave. And it's a really interesting poem because cleave means to pull apart, but it also means to put back together. So it's like a really interesting word. So this is what I came up with that day. The house that we built. It's kind of a love poem a little bit. As if my fingers could cleave the brick, as if the brick wasn't stone, as if the stone made whole the house whose empty rooms weigh time's disaster. Make the stone, cleave the brick, make and remake, remake. Yes, wind, yes, water, the house persists. As if my hands could brick the cleave, threatening the house, as if those ruddy stones were not placed by men, as if the stones weren't sometimes frail, as if the men that made the house did not have hands to close the cleave and stack the brick. Darling, you're the house, or I'm the house. Or you're the stone that makes the brick that firms the house, and I'm the hands that try to cleave. Or you're the fingers that lay the brick that built the house, and I'm the cleave that your hands close. And it's kind of got that it's the house that Jack built.
I love that.
Grimy kind of thing, but in a different, in a different way. But
Yeah, it's got that rhythm. Oh,
yeah, it's
Yeah.
got that rhythm. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah,
That was a really fun one to do.
I find myself also, in terms of linguistic gymnastics that you're talking about, also, I mean, I guess that is still linguistics, but musical gymnastics that you're doing too, and thinking about how much, getting back to that essential idea of how much we can understand poetry just through its sound, and also
Correct.
enjoy it, or get or really connect with it, or have some pleasure from just the actual sound. Like,
I mean, look at Lewis Carroll.
Yeah.
For example, with the Snicker snack and the Jabberwocky and all that. That's kind of in that tradition. And I love that too, making up your own words, coming up with, taking a rhythm from someplace else and making it your own.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Yeah, it's really fun.
Great. You want to take
do we have another question?
Yeah, we
have.
Yes, we have two more. Okay. A question for each of you. Do you find other poets find things in your poetry that you might not have realized were there?
Oh, like 1,000,000%. Yeah. Sometimes, even in my fiction too, people will read it and they'll go, oh, well, you did this masterful thing, or you did this thing that. And I was like, oh, yeah, I had no idea that I did that. And it happens a lot. Does that happen a lot to you guys too?
Yeah, of course.
Things are subconscious, but people see it.
And then you're like, oh, of course.
And you're like, oh, yeah, of course I did that masterful thing. But honestly, you don't know what you did.
That's the highest form of praise, though. I mean,
yeah,
for someone to internalize your work and then come up with a perspective that you hadn't even considered, it becomes theirs. And I think that's the goal. That we put this work out and we hope that it becomes someone's other than ours. We're letting it go. It's like children, you have them.
You have to. Art is never done. It's just abandoned, right? And then we have to hope someone takes it up and cares for it the way we did. Yeah,
that's wonderful. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think sometimes even just very casual things from at a poetry reading or something, somebody will say something you're like, yeah, of course I intended the grapes to mean that. Like,
right, exactly.
Because again, we are, we're in the art is a practice, right? And I mean, when you do it, you're a lot of things coming through subconsciously too that we don't.
Yeah.
And it's interesting sometimes when we try to control that too much is actually when the poems feel too forced or too worked, and when we're not discovering anything, and and I think that's a sign of the better poems that one has, is when they keep on finding people in the world, finding angles, new things that even I gotta say, even when I read them, sometimes after reading them, I'm like, wow, I never realized that amber in the poem like is really symbolic of this whole theme of the poem. Like I just went on instinct, right? But
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I love when that happens.
Yeah.
I should say we also. I mean, I think we inspire. I don't know if this is kind of the same question, but when you have reading people's or close friends' manuscripts and books is of course not just about them. It's also how much it teaches the reader, the critiquer, right? It's an extended form of therapy and I mean of workshop.
Yeah.
And,
therapy too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
therapy too. But like it's very inspiring. Like I'll probably be writing like Nikki now for like a couple weeks. Like just I'll try to I want to write more like Nikki. Of course I won't. I can't because I'm not Nikki. But and Nikki can't write like Richard. Rich can't write Carrie. Can't write like Nikki. But it's inspiring to pick up the new things. Like just because we're so close to each other's voices and seeing like really what you're doing. And I think that also happens too when you make those discoveries about other people's work when you're this close.
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Is there another question?
Yes. Yeah. So we'll close out with this one and you guys can give your closing remarks. What's inspiring you these days and what are you reading?
I just read this really cool book. I just literally
this one that everyone should read. I'm always in the middle of a book, always, mostly audiobooks now. And basically, we're in a rough time right now. So I'm just looking for like an escape right now. So I'm reading a lot of not super, super duper literary books. I have, and then I get really depressed. And then I go back to like some kind of formulaic, like bubblegum book that's great. But I just read this Jesmyn Ward book. Do you know her?
Oh yes,
she's so good. But oh my god, heartbreaking. Ooh, yes, that one.
Oh god, it was so good.
So good. But then now I just finished that. Now I need to go get something lighter. So
I'm reading The Glass Hotel, which is really good.
Oh, cool.
Family Center.
Yeah, that was great. And did you read the one before?
Yes,
Station 11. Yeah.
Oh, Station 11.
Yeah.
Night Circus. Really? Yes, I loved like in that book how it speaks to what we're talking about and the found elements in your poems that they traveled. It was like an apocalyptic traveling museum. And of these relics of the things that they would collect from society, kind of like the things that you have collected from society that you've inserted in the book, dawn and the birds and the language that you absorb and then put out there is kind of reminiscent of that. Because isn't that ultimately what a poem is? It's like a little museum that you can read that speaks to the poet and the poet's world, whatever world is, speculative or not. So I'm a high school teacher, honey. I can always bring it back to the story. I can always bring it back.
Teach it.
And we also just got done with, I like going back to the classics sometimes. So there's 2 books that I read every single year. So this year I have to do them again. I read The Diary of Anne Frank every year. And I read A Movable Feast by Hemingway every year. I don't know if we're like canceling him now or whatever. Anyway, it's fantastic. And we just went on a road trip, my husband and I, and we listened to 1984 in the car. I don't know if we're canceling Orwell or whatever now anyway either, but he was a little off personally, but man, those books, So I think it's really nice to go back to the classics sometimes. Yeah.
That's funny because I always tell the story. Actually, now that you say that, Nikki, like we haven't done that in years, but remember when we were younger back when we party a little bit more back then, we'd like call each other and read T.S. Eliot out loud.
That's all we did. We would read Prufrock to each other constantly.
And I always share that story. I still read like.
We used to read it to each other in the car. We would try to memorize it.
Yeah. And then bad poetry by movie stars. I mean, by
Ali
TV,
Sheedy.
By celebrities.
I still have that book. So Ali Sheedy has a book of poem out. Whoever is watching this, you must go get it and just read it to each other at a party. It is spectacularly bad, but it's amazing.
I've actually do that. I've incorporated that in some creative writing classes. I'd like, let's look at why this is, we'll take
Not
bad
good.
poems and go like, and then I tell them, write the worst poem you can right now. Like, get it out
I
of your
love
system.
that.
Get
That's
it out of
a
your
really
system. The
cool
worst,
idea.
cheesiest.
That's great.
I love that. Yeah,
That is a great idea.
It can only go on for
Right.
But I've been wanting to say something just sort of a little bit of like sort of in jest, but like I don't want to write now because like it's a good thing Nikki's my friend, because if not I'd hate her right now. Like she's the kind of writer you'd like to hate because you're like, damn, how'd she do that? Like, and you're like, she's not dead, so like you can't no, but it's very inspiring. But speaking about process and reading and all that, I'm myself am in a writing mode, in a writing spurt, and just trying to finish a poem a week, like Campbell would say to us, Campbell McGrath, our professor. Poem a week is a book a year, except I don't write a poem a week. I'm a hoarder. Like I just keep stuff, like you're saying, in my mind, and now I have like a 5-year gestation period, and I was like, I got to spit
And
this
then it
out.
all just comes out.
It's like a poem a week, boom, 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 like, but then I'm not reading as much, I have been. What's interesting now, I have another project in my hand, but I really have gotten finally reading about craft, about braided essays, and sort of looking at that as a possibility for a book. Not this one, the next one, and that's been fascinating to watch. And I think, it's like I think what Nikki's doing. There's a lot of the buzzword these days of hybrid and whatnot. But this is a fresh take on the idea of hybridity and genre and the fluidity of genres. That's just, I think, brilliant. And in more ways than just, I'm going to do this and do that, but in a really organic and really complex way, how that book pulls so many things together and can work in so many different ways, right? So I'll just like to end with that compliment, because I know we got to go, but I hate you. Hate you. Not sorry.
Mwah, mwah, mwah. Mwah.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. Nikki, any final comments?
That's it.
Final
Thank
remarks?
you to Books and Books, and thank you to my absolute besties. And
We love
Carrie
you.
is most known for, yes, the poetry, but also being the maid of honor at my wedding. And Richard is most known for being the officiant at my wedding, and then the inaugural poem.
We'll have to add that to the bio.
So I love you both so much. You're an inspiration to me, and I thank you for
We
being
love you.
here
We're very proud
with
of
me.
you.
Love you
so
too.
much.
I'm proud. Yeah.
Well, thank you
Bye,
so
everyone.
much to all our speakers
Thank
and to
you.
everyone in the audience. If you haven't ordered your copy of Extremely Lightweight Guns, please do so. And we'll see you at our next virtual event.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.